I'd like to thank you for your courageous leadership and all that you have done in the Commonwealth to get us to this point. Without your leadership and without your commitment to all of the citizens in the Commonwealth, we would not be here today. On a personal note, I think many people feel that they'd like to have their mothers, their fathers, all of those who fought during the civil rights movement, during desegregation, to witness this moment. Although my parents are not here, I applaud them and applaud you for bringing us to this moment. This historical moment has given us a unique opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to breaking down monumental inequities and to tell a truer, better, and more honest Virginia story. Black history is Virginia history. Ultimately, the Commission's recommendations will help all Virginia students develop a comprehensive understanding of the African American voices that contribute to our story. Virginia's standards of learning must be inclusive of African American contributions, culture, and accomplishments, provide opportunities for students to engage deeply in its richness, allow them to draw connections from the past to its relevance in our contemporary communities, and provide the knowledge that is necessary to close knowledge gaps for all age students and ethnicities. As our students are presented with this history, they will wrestle with the ways in which Black and Brown Virginians will have been disenfranchised, marginalized, and oppressed from the time the first African Americans arrived at Old Point Comfort in 1619. However, they will better understand how African Americans have found ways to survive, preserve our culture and our families, and help build a flourishing Virginia society. We believe that the recommendations made by the Commission will result in curriculum changes that will allow Virginia students to thoroughly examine and directly combat systemic racism in the Commonwealth's history in order to work together towards a better society, a better educated citizenry, and a better Virginia. Students will be educated to appreciate the fact that African Americans have made valuable contributions to society in Virginia and the United States. If we get this right, African American history will move from a season to a continuous study of the depth and the fullness of African Americans on our Commonwealth. Students will develop greater empathy for their neighbors and a deeper understanding of their ancestors. They will come to realize that they are a part of a greater solution and a greater future. Thank you, Governor and the Commission.
Thank you, Governor Northam, for this time to share why, as a teacher, I believe the work of the Commission is so crucial, which is why I agreed to be part of this Commission. African American history is our history, and we have an obligation as teachers to make sure that history that we are teaching is equitable, accurate, and inclusive of all perspectives. As teachers, we look to the curriculum framework to help us focus our content teaching. I served on the African American History Education Standards Subcommittee, and two of our foremost goals were to enrich the standards and framework and to make corrections to errors, inaccuracies, or misleading statements regarding African American history. The vast majority of Virginia's elementary teachers were not history majors in college. So any information that we can provide through standards, curriculum frameworks, and supporting resources is especially valuable to them. Even as a high school teacher who majored in history, I find that there is much that I still need to learn in regards to African American history. There is a deep need for investing in professional development so we have the confidence and knowledge we need to help students gain a comprehensive understanding of African American history and to embed this content through all subject areas. One of my goals as a teacher is to give my students a better understanding of the history of our Commonwealth, nation, and world. We have to make sure that African American voices are present in our teaching and history, that they are not muted or misrepresented, and that our educators have the knowledge to represent them holistically and in ways that are relevant to their students' lives. This past school year, one of my African American students asked me if I knew about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and I was ashamed to say that I did not. She wanted to know why we weren't taught about things like that and why so much of African American history was left out of her education in school. None of our students should feel like they are not represented or present in our study of history. Virginia's standards of learning must be inclusive of African American history and provide opportunities for students to engage deeply, drawing connections to its relevance in our contemporary communities. Moreover, professional development must be present to support educators. Recent events over the past year in the Commonwealth and the nation show how critical it is to have an accurate understanding of our history. Many of the arguments over Confederate monuments stem from a lack of understanding of why they were built. Knowledge is key. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Miles.
Miles, you're up.
Okay, until Miles rejoins us, I'll go ahead. Good morning, everyone. My name is Makia Little. I am a commissioner, a proud HBCU graduate, and parent advocate of the Commission on African American History Education. When I first discovered that I was about to become a mother, so many thoughts raced through my mind. Would it be a boy or a girl? Will they look more like me or their father? And which room in my home would I convert into a nursery? Were some of the questions that rattled around in my head. But the overwhelming thought that consumed me was, would I be a good mother? As my belly grew, my family members, friends, and absolute strangers offered plenty of unsolicited parenting advice laced with their own definitions of what it would take to accomplish such a feat. After unpacking my own fears and worries, I grew to realize my definition centered around my ability to protect my child. Protecting him seemed easy while he was growing in my womb. We'd play secret games of guess that body part and elbow whack-a-mole. But once he entered the world and I returned to the workplace, my ability to protect him and control every aspect of his day quickly diminished. After leaving a few prospective daycares in tears, I finally built up enough trust in an institution managed by forces of which I had no control with the safety and well-being of my child. As my son grew into a big brother and he and his sisters entered grade school, I recognized their affinity for cultures outside of their own. The insecurities my son developed over the width of his nose and that my girls developed over the curliness of their hair were similar to those I held as a child and have since shed. Products of a public education system that has elevated figures of European descent while relegating those of African heritage to slavery and servitude has put an undue burden on me and parents who look like me to develop our own in-home curricular frameworks that teach our children that their history is just as rich and dynamic as those they are exposed to each and every day of the school year. And as painful as it is to have to destroy your Black child's innocence by having the talk, to not do so definitely keeps you out of the running for good parent in our society, as there is no other way to avoid this conversation while keeping the promise to protect your child. In the great debate held at the University of Cambridge in 1965, the world-renowned intellectual James Baldwin, when asked to argue in the affirmative for, has the American dream been achieved at the expense of the American Negro, embarked upon his response by describing it as a loaded question, stating, one's response to that question, one's reaction to that question, has to depend on effect and, in effect, where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions, which we hold so deeply so as to be scarcely aware of them. It is therefore my belief that until we as Americans and Virginians can work to dismantle our assumptions by teaching a more accurate narrative and truth of our history, that we can begin understanding and working from the same system of reality, having the Commonwealth as a partner in not just ensuring my children are taught the truth, but that their classmates and future coworkers, colleagues, and managers are also taught that same truth is vital to the protection and prosperity of all our children. It has been my absolute honor to represent parents from across the Commonwealth and work alongside the esteemed historians, researchers, and scholars of this commission. I'd like to publicly thank Assistant Superintendent Holly Coy, Deputy Secretary Tracy DeShazer, Secretary Atif Carney, and Governor Ralph Northam for determining parent were the only qualifications I needed to receive this appointment. In my very first meeting with Holly Coy, I posed the question, what kind of citizens do we want to produce? Since that time, she, along with several other members of the Virginia Department of Education, the governor's cabinet, and the governor himself, have worked to answer that question in the best way possible. So now, after an amazing year of meetings, conversations, exploration, and collaboration, I am filled with hope, not just for my children, but for all children and citizens of the Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. Governor, for helping me keep the promise while they were yet unborn.